Sandra is the National Development Manager for Activity Agreements, and as I mentioned earlier on, she works for YouthLink Scotland. And I've got some questions for you. And these questions should hopefully help you understand a wee bit more about what activity agreements are. So the first question, just tell us about your job, Sandra. What's your job role and what do you do?
Well, I've been in post now since 2010, very beginning of 2010, and that was when Scottish Government introduced activity agreements and decided to pilot it across 10 local authority areas, of which Dumfries wasn't one of the pilots. And the post sits within YouthLink because the government wanted to fund someone out with the government and out with the local authority that could be independent and could sit in another organisation which had links into youth organisations, community learning and development within local authorities, etc. So that's me.
So that's you?
Kind of.
Kind of. So what is an activity agreement? Obviously that's the main question.
Well, an activity agreement is, it was introduced first, I should say, because it was felt that there was still a gap for some young people. You know those young people that are really hardest to help, and we talk about them quite often, but those young people who are hardest to help and need an intervention post-school probably, and I'll talk about that in a wee bit later, to make that transition from school or to make that transition into the world of work or a national training programme or something more solid. And it was acknowledged that for a certain group of young people, there was still something missing. So an activity agreement the activity agreements were introduced, and it's a bespoke for an individual package of learning, further learning, and it can be a whole range of activities, but it is in its truest sense driven by the individual. So it's what the individual needs to take them forward and help them assist them to move on to the next stage.
So in Dumfries and Galloway, how will an activity agreement work?
Well, I think Dumfries and Galloway have been clever about how they're taking this forward and they're going to implement it. And I've been working with Sophie and Dawn and Lynn, talking to them about how the other models worked within the pilot. And they've considered that, along with some of their partners, to look at how best to implement this in Dumfries and Dumfries and Galloway. And what it's about is about implementing it round about the current structures that you have. It's not about inventing new structures and processes, etc., but it's to really build on what's already there. So in Dumfries and Galloway, I think, and Lynn can correct me if I'm wrong, the decision's been taken that a young person will be referred through numerous routes, so it could be through schools, perhaps colleges, social work, criminal justice, community learning and development, skills development Scotland. A young person can be referred through those routes or indeed self-referred. They will then work with a trusted professional to actually work out what it is the young person needs and how they're going to address those needs. And they will pull in and use a lot of the partners that are in this room as well. So
the partners in the room would be part of the delivery process. So how will it be delivered? Who will do that?
Well, I think, again, kind of learning from the pilots and what's going to be happening in Dumfries and Galloway is it will be private provision, third sector and public sector provision as well. But there's a whole host of organisations out there that are already working and dealing with this client group. So again, it's been considered how best to work with them and pull them into this, I suppose, and I hate using the word because it's overused, the partnership approach to this, but really that's key, and that's what at the bottom of it all.
So you mentioned the type of young people that would be, so who would be eligible for the programme? Well,
those young people, and this is to avoid any confusion, because I know kind of across the country there's cutbacks. It's a horrendous time for people, particularly in local authorities, people that are dependent on funding coming from other places. But what it's not for people who would normally have gone to college or onto a national programme, but there are no places for them. That's not who it's for. It's for those young people who would never have been able to go to college in the first place. So it's making that, getting something to bridge that gap. In the guidance documents, and I know Lynn's pulled together some information in a pack which will be really useful. I don't know if there's a list there, but there's a guidance document that's on the YouthLink website that you can look at if you need to be. It'll give you a bit more detail. there are a list of those young people who it's likely to be. Now, that list's not exhaustive, and certainly what we wouldn't want to do is say, well, unless you fall into this category, you're not eligible for an activity agreement. It's really about the young person themselves. And I think for the first time as well, what we've got is something that's really flexible. It's not bound by rules and regulations, etc., but it's a flexible approach to dealing with a certain client group.
What will they be doing? What activities?
Well, they can be doing a whole range of activities. Someone the other day said to me they were learning how to do a spray tan. Wasn't too successful because they were still producing people in the shade of green when they were doing it, as opposed to a shade of brown. So they can be doing all sorts of activities. So what we would classify as soft skills, personal development, confidence building, communication skills. They could also be doing some outward bound stuff and getting skills through working in groups, organising outward bound trips, etc. And also they could be accessing college tasters. That was really important in the pilot phase. A few of the pilot areas got together and organised for local colleges to give them tasters of courses, because you'll know yourselves working with these young people. What do you want to do? Hair and beauty or construction or motor mechanics? It was about really kind of widening out that choice and experience of what's out there. So a lot of college courses. Volunteering as well, again, was really important in the pilot phase, and they used volunteering a lot for young people to get them onto that next stage.
So it wouldn't be the same thing every day or a long-term programme?
No, it wouldn't be, and I know we don't really have time to go into the ways of provision and the difficulties of procuring provision if you're in a local authority, but it was more about looking outward and seeing what provision is available in a local area and how can you access it for a young person, and is that funded through another route? So how do we work with that organisation to ensure there are places there for our young people out there? The pilots didn't have to buy a particularly huge amount of provision, which I think was a surprise for us, because when we'd kicked off, the budget reflected the thought that there was going to be a need to buy provision that wasn't already out there, and in actual fact, it wasn't the case. And I use the example of Glasgow, and I know it's a different area and different demographics, but there was so much provision out there that key in the planning of all of this for the trusted professional role, the people that were working with the young folk, and the 16+ learning coordinator, was to have a real good handle on what was out there. And that was the real value in having trusted professionals who know provision that's out there, know local labour market, and have good links in with volunteering organisations and employers. We did manage to get quite a lot of employers to engage in the pilot phase by allowing young people to go along again and just taste the workplace. Now, I say taste, and I emphasise that because these young people couldn't sustain a work placement for a day a week or 2 or 3 days a week. That would very much be towards the end of their activity agreement, where they were one stage away from moving on.
I think the next question I had for you was about financial support. Do you want to talk about that, or will we just... No,
so, I will. I will. You'll know that this activity agreement approach sits very clearly and very firmly within the senior phase of Curriculum for Excellence, but out with the school environment. And that caused a bit of difficulty in the pilot phase as well, because young people on an activity agreement can apply for an EMA if they're eligible in terms of other income for their families. So there is an EMA available up to £30.
You'll be pleased to hear that this is the last question, but we will take questions from the delegation as well. But how can the people here today help implement activity agreements? How can they be involved in it?
Well, I would imagine the fact that you'd been invited to this event would suggest quite highly that you had a role in this. So whether it's in an organisation that works with young people, that can identify them and think, yes, actually they do need support in terms of learning to move on to the next stage. So you're there, you've got first-hand experience of the young person. You could either refer them through LIN or through SDS for assessment, to participate in an activity agreement, you could be that trusted professional for the young person and access what it is they need. Or you could, thirdly, be a provider. So you could bring to the table what provision you have and how you can help with the young people. Now, I know, again, I had mentioned provision, and I know a lot of the private sector providers provide courses of 6 weeks, 3 days a week or whatever. But we have experience now in the pilots where they've actually been much more flexible in their approach to delivery. And in some areas, they've worked up something. I'm thinking particularly in Fife, where they worked up a programme round about community involvement that young people did engage with on a more structured basis. So, you know, there's lots of different ways and lots of different approaches, but it's just about how you as individuals can contribute to this and move it forward. And that's where it will be successful, where you just knock down the barriers between provision and between organisations, and you come together, I suppose, in a much more coherent approach for the individual who's at the centre of it, and not particularly from where you're coming from, which can be quite a difficult shift to make.
That's fantastic. Okay, for the moment, can we thank Sandra for her comments?
Sure.